Hi creatives, it's Lauren Elizabeth here with Lauren Elizabeth Animal Art. If you're new here, welcome. I'm a pet and wildlife acrylic artist and instructor. Thank you so much everyone who ordered from my new Etsy shop, which I very recently opened. And as for today's tutorial, this is a really special one. We're gonna learn how to paint not just golden retrievers, but how to paint dogs. I've jam-packed this tutorial with so much and my updated 12-step dog painting process. So maybe you want to make dog portraits as gifts this holiday or offer dog portrait commissions or both. This tutorial will equip you. I not only have the traceable printout linked down below, but also a list of notes because I stuff it full. I go over how to paint dog noses, how to paint dog eyes, how to paint long fur, how to paint dog mouths. And so you don't want to miss this one if you're really trying to create quality pet portraits this holiday season. So without further ado, let's get painting.
All right, so I have the traceable outline linked down below. I also have a video in case you've never used a traceable and you want to learn how to transfer it to your paper or canvas. Let's real quick go through the colors we'll need. White, grass green, violet, yellow ochre, raw sienna, raw umber, black, cadmium yellow, phthalo blue, and then later we'll also add permanent red to our paint palette. Now the first two steps in my 12-step dog painting process have nothing to do with the painting, so I'll not really touch on those too much. Step 1 is to find a quality reference photo. Step 2 is to create a rough sketch. Now I got you covered for the first two steps. We'll move on to step 3, which is to paint your background and the connected parts. Now the background includes everything in the background. So whether you want to have it a simple one color background or multicolored or having different details in the background, that's what you want to aim to complete in step 3. For Maisy's portrait, I'm going to mix up 2 colors for the background, violet with lots of white, a light colored lavender, so that's a little bit of violet, lots of white, and then I'll pick up some of that in a separate pile next to it, and I'll add a little bit of black, very small amount, and more white and more violet. So for Maisy's background, we'll have 2 different violets, one that's a much lighter lavender, and then a grayish violet that's more medium in value. Now why I chose to use these colors, one, because the complementary color of yellow is violet, and we have lots of yellows that we'll be painting in Maisy's fur. And 2, we have such a range of very, very light yellows and tans in Maisy's fur, along with some real dark brown shadows. So to balance this and create contrast, I chose a light to medium value background.
And I'll grab my angle brush. This is my size 10 angle brush. And I'll just paint in the background and my sides. So I'm going to start with my darker gray violet on the left side. And then on the right side will be my lighter violet.
Now let's chat about why I decided to use the medium value on the far left side of Maisy, and then I'll blend to the lighter value on the right. Well, in this step, we want to determine where that light source is, right off the bat. So we see the strongest yellows and light tans on the left side of Maisy, and the darkest shadows on her right. So we know that light source is coming from about the upper left. So what these different value colors are doing for Maisy, they're complementing her fur, they're creating contrast in the painting, and further drawing the attention, the viewer's attention to Maisy, not competing with her. Now, if you're a little confused about color value, maybe you're new to my tutorials, What color value is, it's not what color it is, so blue, green, red, it's how light or dark that color is. Now, before you think you can't, because maybe you don't consider yourself an artist, you don't have that eye, I promise you it will just click. It'll just make sense. What you're looking for is how dark, medium, or light a specific color is. You might have heard people say that a great way to practice this is by painting a colored piece from a black and white photo. Because what you can do is where you see a medium gray, you can add a medium violet. Or where you see a very light gray in that black and white reference photo, you can add a very bright light yellow. Does this make sense? In my tutorials, I really try to simplify this by breaking these values up into dark, medium, and light values. Once you practice those three, then you can start to really differentiate the ranges, all the different shades within each dark value and medium value and light value. We're going to have a range of all three. Now, if you'd like further instruction on picking and choosing the best backgrounds for your dog portrait, let me know in the comments down below. If I get enough interest, I can make a separate video for that. But what I'm doing here is I'm working my way around that flower and to the right. You're welcome to switch to a smaller brush if it's easier, but then what I'll do is blend wet into wet, switching to my light violet, the light lavender, while the paint is still wet. So making sure that you work at a good enough pace where you don't let this background color dry, you let it be wet so that you can then blend it in to that lighter violet. That's why they call it wet into wet, for those of you newbies out there. Now, normally I do this at the very beginning, but I jump straight into the dog painting steps. But as we paint our background, let's just warm up and take 4 deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. Let's get our minds and our bodies, our hands ready for a great paint. This is how I like to start a painting and prepare my mind, wiring in new healthy thoughts as I'm painting and being extra focused and centered on what I'm doing. So let's just protect this time, make it a positive, relaxing time, not critical, judgmental, or negative. So with a clean, damp brush, meaning I'm washing off my brush in the water, I'm patting it damp, not dry, or leaving it sopping wet. Then I'm going to pick up that lavender paint. This is the light lavender, and blending that to the right. Now I won't actually bring this all the way down along the right side. I'll actually go about halfway and then pull in straight white and blend that all the way down. I want it even lighter lavender in the lower right corner. Now, please don't think that you have to perfect the background so it's just spotless and without a single blemish. Don't spend hours and hours and hours on your background so that it takes all that energy and joy away from the actual dog painting. The main priority is to make sure you get as close to that line, if not over top your sketch line, so that that area is done surrounding the dog, so you don't have to redo that, especially with dogs like Maisy with long fur. You have a little bit more flexibility with dogs with short fur. And even then, you'll notice at the very end of this tutorial, I go over a second time on this background to give it some more texture, a little bit more life. Just try your best to get as much of that background done as possible, especially surrounding the dog. Get at least one base coat down over those sides to make your life easier at the very end when we have to do touch-ups. Now, a part of my habit when I paint along with deep breathing is listening and meditating on scripture verses. And for today's verse, connected to this painting, it comes from Psalms 16:11. It brings me so much joy when I read this. You teach me the way of life. In your presence is total celebration. Beautiful things are always in your right hand. Little technique I use to smooth out brush strokes, even though they're not that bad. If you leave them, I promise they'll grow on you after some time, even though at the beginning they might annoy the snots out of you. Making sure my brush is still damp with some of that paint on there, I'll position my brush at an angle so that the bristles just barely touch the canvas and the paint, smoothing that area out. Now, if you're new to this, I definitely recommend letting your canvas dry after you've completed the background for about 5-10 minutes, and then moving on to the next part. Within step 3, we're still on step 3. That's to complete the connected parts.
All right, so I'm using my size 1 spot brush and working on the connected parts first before we start working on the dog. And I'm going to start with the leaves in the back. I'm going to use my Cadmium Yellow and Grass Green, and I'll paint the leaves in first.
This sunflower is what I call a connected part. Anything the animal is wearing, the animal is touching, or leaning up against. So this includes collars, leashes, bow ties, blankets, pillows, even the owner's hand or pet toys. So we just want to think of, in step 3, the things that are behind the pet and on the pet. That's what we want to aim to get completed as best we can before step 4. So I have just 2 leaves for this tiny little delicate sunflower. Then I'll wash out my brush and we'll move on to those petals. Are you starting to see how we're layering? We want to start background and layer to the foreground.
All right, so I find it's a lot easier to paint the petals over top the leaf, and then the center of the sunflower over top the inside of the petals. So I want a darker yellow to start. Let's mix up yellow ochre, cadmium yellow with some white.
That's yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, and white.
I'm going to start with a darker base, and we're going to have to add lots of yellow, layers of yellow over top that to really make it stand out and be more vibrant than all the yellows in here, because I don't want the sunflower to just get lost in all the yellows of the golden retriever fur.
Once again, the background and the connected parts should never take away or compete with the colors in the dog. We don't want to have the connected parts just getting lost in the fur by having it be the same exact value or colors as Maisy. So that's why I'm going to first put a base that's a dark yellow, let that dry, and then towards the middle to end of this process, I'll go in with a much more vibrant light yellow that we won't add to Maisy, and add that over top the petals.
Be careful as you're getting around that leaf that you don't pull in too much green. If you get a little green, that's okay, but try not to get too much in there. And what I am trying to do too is keep these petals pretty much all symmetrical in width, in length, in size, but still having them go in different directions. It also looks really lifelike if they're overlapping. So I have this one that I didn't fill in all the way. I have like a line of white that's going to help me differentiate these petals when we add the lighter layers. And I'm trying not to paint over that eye.
In my tutorials, I'll use the word guidelines, where I'll leave parts of the white or do things that help me know where body parts start and end, or where things go that I don't want to forget about later. So it's almost like little hints, little roadmaps that I leave myself along the way so I don't forget or even accidentally throw off proportions. All right, creative, so do any touch-ups that you'd like to do to the leaves or the petals. Just don't get too caught up on details now in the beginning phase. If this is something that you'd like to do as gifts later or even commission pet portraits in the future, I always recommend not just quality and excellence, but also efficiency. So if you train your hand and your mind to keep that steady pace, it becomes automatic.
And then I'll wash up my brush and we'll mix up a very dark brown with black, and so we have black and burnt umber. Is that burnt umber? That's raw umber. So it's raw umber and black with a little bit of yellow ochre. That's raw umber, black, and yellow ochre. And this is the very dark brown that we'll use for the center. And I'm not going to make this like a perfect circle. I'm going to make it kind of bumpy, painting over top the bottoms of those petals we just painted in.
I'm intentionally not trying to keep this a perfect circle. I'm ever so carefully pushing out these little bumps with my brush on the outer edge of the circle. Now we're gonna let that sunflower dry, the base layer, and then add just a few final highlights at the very end. So the main base layers are down. That's a priority in step 3. But now we're gonna let that dry and move on to our focal points. That's step 4.
With black, so this is black, I'm going to still use my spot brush, size 1 spot brush. We don't have any iris that we really see. We just barely see a little bit of brown on that left eye. So let's just start with what we know. We're gonna outline both eyes, and then we'll mix up another color for the other parts of the eye. If you can't see the iris, don't just try and paint it in. It'll turn into an alien, look a little weird. So if you just see black, then paint black and get all those different shades of gray. Light gray, dark gray, and then add those final highlights over top that. So what I will do is I will use black to outline the circle, which is containing the iris and the pupil. But on this one, we have the light. So we see a lot more detail on that left eye, but we have a lot more shaded, a lot of the right eye shaded in. So I will fill in around this circle, I will fill it in with black. So I'll outline this area and then fill this area in with my black.
All right, so just a recap. Anytime you're working with a pet portrait, maybe the dog has so much fur covering its eyes that you can hardly make out the color of the eyes, also called the iris, or the distance of the dog, so you can't make out the eye color, or even just the lighting in the room. That's when you just work with your dark, medium, and light grays. Now, in some instances, we can get away with it where we make it up or we guess at the color, but I recommend not doing it that way. It really makes it look less realistic, more zombie-like if you try and fill in the iris when you don't see it.
I'm going to mix it more just by pulling some white into it, so I have a lot of a very dark gray. So it's like just a tiny bit of white and lots of black. Makes it kind of glide a little more smoothly, and I'm going to outline the entire nose and fill in the nostrils. And then with this dark gray, might add some more white to it. We'll fill in or outline the dark areas of the mouth. So let's start with the nose.
All right, so the focal points, what we want to do is with a dark gray or black is outline the eyes, fill in the pupils if you see them, fill in the nostrils, outline the nose, and fill in any black or dark gray around the mouth. And we do see that on Maisy where her mouth is open. So if the mouth is closed, then you would just bypass the mouth. Or if the dog has a very pink brown nose, you would work with, I recommend, a raw sienna and permanent red mixture. You don't always have to use black. I don't even recommend it if the dog has a brown or pink nose. But most often with dogs, they have a very dark nose. Now, although I cover a lot in this tutorial, I just cannot fit all that I know about painting specific dog breeds or other dog fur types like curly fur or brindle fur, for example, or how to paint abstract, colorful dog paintings, or how to approach dog toys or clothing, or even brush technique. That's so big when it comes to painting dogs. But all this you can find in my online Animal Art Masterclass. It's an uplifting, colorful, supportive class designed to take the beginner and intermediate level artist to masters of acrylic, pet, and wildlife art while reducing stress, anxiety, and depression. It was roughly 7 years ago now when I fell in love with acrylic animal art while in the deepest storm of my life battling major addiction, anxiety, and depression. And I owe it to my faith and the daily habit of creating animal art each day that I'm a much healthier and braver Lauren today, and why I created the online Animal Art Masterclass. So if you really like to master dog portraits or cat portraits and or learn how to paint wildlife, this class is something that even the beginner can do, even the advanced artist will learn from. So if you have a friend in mind that this would bless or this would bless you, I have links to the masterclass down below. But guys, let's get back to painting this nose. Now, I just want to say, I really do try to keep a good pace but not go too fast. There's some areas that are a bit complex in this tutorial that I slow down quite a bit. But at any point, if you feel like you're falling behind or you want to go back to a certain spot, don't feel like you have to rush or as if there's something wrong with you because you're a bit slower or maybe having trouble in a certain spot. Just use the pause and play button on your screen at any time.
right, I'll add a little bit of white to this just so it's not too dark. Make that slightly lighter dark gray, same brush, and then I'll just fill in that beautiful smile. And we don't see any teeth, so we don't even have to worry about painting any teeth.
So in step 4, after we outline the eyes, fill in the pupils, outline the nose, fill in the nostrils, and the mouth, then we actually paint them in. But these are the areas that the viewer looks first, so we really want to make sure that we have the proportions perfected. We want to make sure the darkest layers are down first, and we can actually paint the focal points when other parts of our painting in the background are drying. So like I said, we want to make sure that outer outline around the dog needs to be done, and preferably the connected parts and the background. But if you're waiting for those to dry, any parts, then you can work on the focal points after that, just to keep your momentum up and not having to wait with having such big gaps in between parts. Now I'm going to add permanent red to my paint palette. We won't actually be needing this color for the nose, but when you have dogs with maybe brownish gray noses or maybe pinkish brown noses, that's when you would add permanent red, raw sienna, or even some raw umber or burnt umber with white and black to help you create that outline and paint it in.
Okay, so we're going to work on that nose, if my brushes will stay. So I'm going to start with my size 4 round brush. This is like the perfect brush for this very large nose. And I'm going to mix up different variations of gray. So we'll start with a darker gray with a little bit of white and a lot of black. Now here's the thing, this gray that we're mixing, so we don't lose this outline, needs to be a dark gray, but lighter than this very dark gray. I think we actually just use black, so keep it just slightly lighter than that outline.
I just say try your best when it comes to mixing colors. We're just making good guesses. We won't know until we test it out on our canvas. So just try your best. We're going to make 3 different grays, a dark, a medium, and a light gray.
I'm going to pull some of this aside and into more white. Okay, so I'm going to make 3 grays here, dark medium, this is our medium gray, and then a light gray. So the little bit of gray that I have left on my brush, I'm going to mix right here, dark, medium, light gray. We don't need that much.
I'm going to slow down the footage for you in case you're still mixing up colors. Then once you have, make sure your brush is clean and damp.
And we'll go into the first color. We'll start with our darks. So starting with our first color, I'm going to test this out to make sure that I can still see that outline because it's pretty dark around it. And you know what? That's a little too dark. So let's add a little bit of white to that to get that slightly lighter.
When in doubt, test it out. If you're not sure about a color, test it out directly on your canvas or on a separate canvas. It just dries and then you can paint right over it. Then after a few dabs, you can figure out whether you need to adjust the color, make it lighter by adding more white or darker by adding, in this case, our case, adding more black. So now I'm going to walk you through where I see these real dark shadows where it's nearly jet black on the nose and these indents that we're just going to map out with this dark gray.
So there's this shadow here because there's like this indent on a dog's nose that goes like that. So let's just fill in this area.
So I'm not painting the areas where I see a medium gray or a light gray on the nose, but around it. So we see that dark gray on the very top of the nose. I'll start working up there and to the right. Then we have strong shadows below that right nostril and above it. so we really have to make sure we don't lose that nostril in the process.
And we have the smallest little highlight right there, but it's quite small. I can just paint over top of this gray, so I'm going to fill in to the right. So that little highlight there, I can just add a little dab of my medium gray there. Now, if you're concerned that you're going to lose these tiny nostrils, leave it white. So like I'm doing here, where there's a highlight right in the corner of the nostril there, I'll often leave areas white so I just keep proportions right. But if I know and I'm pretty confident, I know I can plug it in later, then I'll paint over it fully and then apply that medium value over top. Now this darkness will border to the left of this right nostril. So I brought that over more. That medium value will come right along here. Better to be generous though in this step than have to go back to this color and touch it up. We can also place this color a little bit further on the left of that nostril and around.
I'm not really trying to paint over the black outline, but if I do, it's not the end of the world, especially if that dark gray really is dark.
And you see how there's this beautiful rounded, it's almost like just the top of a circle for that nose, which is why I'm going to create that shape with this dark gray. Whoop, went over that a little bit more. Now we don't want to dilly-dally too much because we want to be blending into that, working wet into wet. We have about 10-minute window to do our blending, so you don't have to work super fast, but just keep up a good steady pace as best you can. All right, so I have a clean damp brush and I'm going into my medium value that we mixed up. And I'm basically just gonna paint in the rest, the white that we have left over, and blending that into the sides like I'm both filling in the white and blending into that dark gray. And hopefully you don't have to take it out too much into that dark gray because you pulled the dark gray in. We want to be generous, like I said, with those initial layers. We want to be very generous with them so that we don't have to go back to it later. If we do, that's okay. If you're a beginner, that's really okay. This is how we learn. All right, and there's those two spots, one on the inside here by the nostril and right below it where we have that little bit that will be blending below it. Now let's say you went in too far to that dark gray.
Of course, there's no harm in revisiting your dark values. It's always best to be as generous as possible when you're applying them at the beginning, but hey, if you need to go back to them, do it.
Next, we're gonna go, while that's wet, into our light gray. I'm only gonna apply paint to the tip of my brush, my size 4 Arteza round brush, because we're gonna add little dots, little highlights over top some of the darkest value gray and a lot of the medium value gray. And that's where we see the lightest highlights. And so I added some little dots. Give it that texture right over top the dark gray and the medium gray below this left nostril. And I'll add some right in here above the left nostril. Little tiny dots that I'm adding in with the point of this brush. This is a great, easy way to get that wet nose look. Now you know where else I'm going to add this? I'm going to add a few dots. This indent is creating a little bit of a dip, so we're getting more of those highlights to the right of that, if that line went all the way up. Now, hold on to these grays. We'll still use them for the next couple steps. We'll use them for the tongue, and we'll use them next for this area below the nose. So this medium gray, let's test this out. Do you see behind the white fur around the snout? It's like a dark gray. Well, we kind of want to go with a medium gray base so that we can add those light strands over top. In about here, underneath the nose, I'll fill it in with this medium gray. Remember, there's a little bit of a dip. I'll bring it to about there with my medium gray. Now while that's wet, I'll dive straight into my light gray, blend that to the left on the left of the snout so I get it to be a lighter gray. And fill that into about here where it starts to get more of that golden color. Kind of climbs up the side of the nose a little bit. See that? There's a little bit of that white there. So we'll get this base down first. And I'll add a little bit of this light gray into, because we have more shadows on the right side, we don't need too much of this lighter gray, except for maybe about a ½ inch to the right. Now, I'm not going to move to that tongue yet because I can then go to my dark gray, hopefully while yours is still wet, and directly below the nose where this indent is, where there's very little, meow meow, get off, silly meow meow, where there's very little fur, so we can see the skin a lot easier. That's where I'll blend in this darkest gray, right below the nose. creatives, mix up more of these grays, okay? We're gonna use them for the eyes, okay? So I just added a little bit of my white, pull in a lot of black. If you don't mix up the same exact black, that's okay. Just as long as we have two different variations where we have, three different, a dark, a medium, and a light gray. That's all we'll be using for now for the eyes. Then we'll add just the littlest bit of brown to create the iris once it's dried. So there's my medium gray. And with a little bit of gray on my brush, I'll mix up a light gray. And I won't be using this brush for the eyes. I'll need something smaller. And I'll move to my size 1 spot brush. All right, so let's start with the right eye, the darkest eye. Pretty dark eye. And I think I'll go first with a medium value, and we'll kind of gauge how dark or light we need to make it. So I'm going to use this medium value with my size 1 spot brush, just fill in the entire pupil. I guess this is the entire eye. We're covering up the pupil. We don't really see much of that. And while that's wet, I'll go into my dark value gray and blend that from the top down, leaving a little bit of a light gray outline around the bottom, just ever so small outline around it. Because if the light's hitting from here, that part of the eye on the right is going to get the highlights. Okay, and now for the left side, again, I'll go with my medium value gray, and we'll figure out how dark or light to make it by adjusting how much dark gray or light gray we add to it. Now what I can do with this color is paint around these outlines as well. Oops. This gray we can also use for that part of the eye too. And then go in with our dark gray, and let's see. The darkest part is again from the top, working its way around the other way. So basically the outer edge of the eye is where it's the darkest, and keeping the top of the eye the absolute darkest. And I know this is a little hard to see because it's so small, but I do want to thicken up the outline above on the far left inner part of the eye with this dark gray. I might even need to go in with black on that area. I'll do that now. I'm going in with black and filling in the far left side of the eye and up around the eye.
I'll also use this black to darken up the black outline around the circle, the eyeball itself.
Now I'm going to go in with the tip of my spot brush with the light gray.
And I'll create this very thin, tiny curved line on the lower right outer edge of the eyeball. Now I want to touch on what we do when we do really see the iris, the colored part of the dog eyes. We would repeat the same first steps. We would outline the eye, outline the eyeball, and fill in the pupils, Let that dry and then paint in the iris. No matter what dog eyes we're painting, we need to make them look symmetrical. In fact, with my dark gray, I'm going to lift up the top of Maisy's left eye here. Now, what do you do if you can slightly tell the iris on one eye, but not the other? Well, you just paint it on that one eyeball, and I'm going to do that here with raw sienna. I'm just going to grab a little bit on my brush, and while that dark gray is wet, I'm going to just blend that in ever so slightly on the far left side of Maisy's left eye. Now, if you went a little too far and blended a little too much, just go back to your dark grays. If you really need to, go back to your black to touch up that outline. Now, I'm sorry if you can't make this out in the reference photo. I really had to look close at this, but I'm going to be painting in with my black the pupils on both eyes. You can just barely see it on that right eye. But here's another tip. If you don't even see the pupils in the eyes and it just looks like a dark gray, don't paint in the pupils. I can make it out here, so I'll paint it in. And then over top that, we'll add our eye highlights after we've let it dry.
So we'll let that dry so then we can add the highlights over top. And we'll use these grays for the next part, the tongue. So I think I'll probably end up going back to my wonderful size 4 spot brush. That was such a helpful brush. And I'll mix up a dark gray, just taking a little bit of this permanent red with dark gray. Right next to it, I'll pull some of that red with the dark gray and pull in some of the medium gray in there. I'll add just the smallest bit of the light gray and a good amount of white with permanent red. So I'll add in more permanent red and white. Okay, now I think gauging the size of this tongue, the best way would probably be to start with the light gray, which it's a lot easier to work the darks into the light gray than having to work the light grays into the darks. And working wet into wet, this will just be a lot easier for us. So very simply, just paint in the entire tongue with your light pink.
Now I'll be showing you how I paint dog mouths now, primarily a dog tongue, without teeth. Maisy's big old tongue here is covering up her teeth so we don't see it.
Now if you're seeing that your pink is a little too dark, just add some white to it.
But if you do see teeth, you would paint them in this step 4 are focal points. And I never recommend the base layer being just white. I recommend a yellowish gray, so that's yellow ochre, white, and a little bit of black, or even some brown in there, so yellow ochre with raw sienna and white, and then adding a very light yellow or white to the teeth exposed to the light for those final highlights.
Now if you need a guideline for that indent here, because it's not directly down along this line, it's a little to the left, just leave it white and we can fill that in with our gray. I left a little bit white there so I know where that starts. Okay, I washed up my brush so it's clean and damp, and I'll go into my medium dark gray. And let's just start filling in that entire area from the back of the mouth to about, I'm going to create a line for you because there's a line that comes down the shadow to about here. Just blending that medium gray into the light pink. So it's darkest right here. That's where it's the darkest because of the light hitting the left. And then it kind of fades, gets a little bit lighter on this side. Then with a clean damp brush, I'll go into the dark reddish gray, and I'm going to pull that line down right to about that shadow and then work back, blending that in so it's even darker.
Now I just barely applied any pressure to my brush. I only used the very tip of this size 4 Arteza round brush. It's ideal for this, filling in tiny little areas. Using the proper brushes really does matter. It's why I love the Arteza brush packs, the detail pack and the variety pack.
And I'll even pull this over along the right side while also pulling in. You see how there's just a tiny little indent? I pulled a curved line over because that's where we see another indent in the tongue. Now I'm going to add some red into some of my, just a little corner of my medium reddish gray, because I want that more red. And where the very tip of the tongue comes in, I'm going to pull that up in towards that line. Okay. And then carefully glide it over to the back.
So that little shadow at the base of the tongue is going to be thicker, but then using the tip of my brush, I'm going to carefully glide it back to join the line in the back of the mouth.
Now this color is the perfect color to blend in to that light pink, and you might need to pick up some more of that light pink because it might be a little sticky, maybe a little dry even. And to the far right side of the tongue, I'll use this color. I'll connect it to the center and work around.
Now, if you're having trouble making out these different shadows and values on the tongue, this is good practice. The more you do this, the more you'll start to develop that eye and see those values. But I'll mix up more of this red that we were just using, reddish gray, into my light gray, to add a subtle, it's not a medium value, it's not a light value, it's right there in between, a light to medium value, and I'm placing it in the middle of the left side of the tongue, not on the far left side, but over a little bit more.
Blending that in. See how it's very subtle here and here? I see a little bit of that along the front right side of the tongue. I'll blend that up into the light pink, and another area I can blend in the corner outer edge of the left side of the tongue. And we're not done yet with that light pink. That light pink is going to be even lighter. So I'm going to scoop up a little bit of that, pull in more white with a clean damp brush, and add these really strong highlights to the far right, left of the tongue. They don't come all the way down along this border. They're up a little higher. See that? there's one there.
So you'll watch me paint in 6 subtle highlights all on the tongue. And it's the light source hitting anywhere where it's kind of sticking up, catching that light. And this is over top the light pink areas.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 highlights. I would even say you can pull that one back a little further on the left of the tongue. All right, before our light gray dries, I'm gonna move to a very tiny brush, my size 2/0 liner brush, and I'm gonna pick up that light gray.
All right, so for those eye highlights, I never recommend starting with straight white, but instead a light gray. And on the left eye, Maisy has a row, 2 rows in fact, of eye highlights. Very carefully, I'll just apply paint to the tip of my liner brush and add delicate little dots over top the left side.
Okay, and then 2 little dots right there on that eye that are about the same size. And with this brush, I'm going to reapply a light gray on that side of the eye. I can even bring another dot like right by the pupil there.
All right, so we're about halfway through this tutorial, and therefore we're going to have a little intermission here. So if you'd like to do any touch-ups before we move on to the Golden Retriever fur, you can. Or if you need to stand up and stretch, or you need to replace your water, take a little break, and then we'll move on to that fur.
All right, next we're gonna mix up lots of different colors for the fur. And once we get the darks and the medium values right underneath the sunflower, then we'll apply the lighter yellows. So first with my palette knife, because it's just a lot easier to mix, I'm gonna pull, starting with my darker brown, raw sienna and yellow ochre. These are all the colors I recommend when painting a golden retriever. Such a helpful, these 2 colors are like your prime colors. A good amount, because we have a good decent amount of darks. So a good amount of raw sienna and yellow ochre. Okay, and then I'll pull some of that into the next medium value, and I'll pull in white this time into that and some yellow ochre.
All right, so take a mental note here. We're at the 1 hour mark. So if at any point when you're painting the fur later in this tutorial and you need to mix up more of these colors, you would come back to the 1 hour and 1 minute marker. We will be using a lot of these colors, so definitely mix up enough now. And I tell people a lot, anytime you want to take breaks, just cover your paint palette with saran wrap or aluminum foil. That'll keep your colors damp for about 3 days, or a spray bottle will help also.
Great, and I'll pull some of that with more white and more yellow ochre.
So you starting to see the trend? I start with the dark values and then I pick up a little bit of that and pull it into the next color, add in more of my light color or white. I really recommend mixing up as many of the colors for the fur ahead of time so you have less to think about on color and more focus on brush technique.
And once more, I'm gonna actually pull that and just add white to it. I'm running out of my white. For our almost white highlights, pull some of that with lots of white. Great. Now we may need to adjust these colors. Now I think I'm going to do, I bet you never would have guessed that the darkest that we'll add is going to be this color with violet. That's what I'll add, and I'll place it right here. So that's the raw Sienna yellow ochre mixture with violet. And that's actually the color we'll start with.
The primary color is yellow and brown colors, and the complement of yellow is violet. So anytime you're trying to darken up a color, I recommend adding its complement. This is a great way to richen up your colors without muddying them up.
All right, here we go. I'm going back to this size 4 round brush, and we're gonna map out very generously with our dark values using this brownish violet, looking for all the areas that I see of real dark shadows in the fur.
We have made it to step 5 of the dog painting process, where we apply the dark values. Now with long fur, I recommend working on one small area at a time before moving on to the next area with dark values. So what this means is we apply the main dark values on the opposite side of the light source, and while those areas are still wet, then we apply our medium values and some of our light values. So not all of them, but some of them while they're damp, so we can do some blending. So right now, I'm only looking for the dark brown areas in Maisy's reference photo on the right side.
And then I'll pick up color mixture number. So this is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's how we'll number these. And I'll start blending down into that white with this brown on the ear.
So that's color mixture 2 that I'm blending in to color mixture 1. A medium value blending into a dark value.
And then go straight to number 3 and start pulling that down all the way to the end of that ear.
Now my method that I've done in the past is where I go throughout the entire portrait and I apply the dark values, and then I move on to my medium values. But I found that this is a bit more realistic and a bit more helpful for creating long, realistic looking fur. So if you want a more abstract look with those real distinct layers, then go around the whole portrait with darks first.
Now go back to color mixture 2 and start blending down along that eye area.
So what I'm also doing is filling in the white of the canvas while also giving a hug, I call it, to the previous layer. We're not covering up that previous layer, we're just cutting into it slightly.
And using this color to then blend below it.
Now this area is just slightly lighter than the darkest brown below that right eye. So I'm going in with color mixture 2 instead of 1.
So I'm going to be filling in this area here. See how this is highlighted? I'll leave that. I'll skip that, work around it. Be generous pulling it down pretty far into it though. And I see that this darkness can come all the way down to the lip, because it gets pretty dark down here. But here, it's a bit lighter. So I'm going to go straight to this color, start blending to that gray.
That's our medium value color mixture 3. Just focus on one small area at a time. Don't focus on details. I know it's so tempting to want to make sure everything's perfectly blended, but our main goal in step 5 is really focusing on those dark values while blending in some of those medium values, working on that side opposite the light source.
And I'll also fill in this highlight that we left on the right of the smile.
For that, I'm using color mixture 3, and because I'm applying so little paint to my brush, you can tell I'm not washing off my brush between colors. It's because I'm not loading up my brush with paint. That's something you really want to avoid doing. So only a thin amount of paint on your brush, and when it does start getting sticky and pulling on your canvas, then you wash out your brush.
Now I'm going to go back to color mixture 2, working up along this line. Starts to get lighter here, but I still see this medium value.
Now some areas where I'm applying medium and darks, there's going to be tiny areas over top that will later apply highlights to. So you can either leave those areas white or paint them with the medium value.
And I'm going to bring it along. See, this kind of, there's a bunch of bumps here that we want to make sure we get. I'll go back to this color mixture 2, and I'm going to work above this dark brown. I even see it comes on the inside. See how it creates kind of like this highlighted triangle? Sorry, I went to the wrong one. Color mixture 3. And fill the rest of that area in below the eye.
That's color mixture 3.
It's quite light, so you know what? I'm gonna go in straight with color mixture 4 and highlight that even more. That's pretty light.
Now I know I'm getting ahead of myself here by adding in a highlight, but if you see it and you want to paint it in, go for it. If not, and you want to wait for steps 6 and 7, where we predominantly focus on our medium values, and then step 7, our highlights, you can apply it then.
Now, do you notice there's a overlap of fur right here? And it's kind of this combination color between color mixture 1 and 2. So I'm going to mix that together and bring that down along the eye where it connects to the ear. It's that little line right there. And work up around the eye. And this even comes up around the right of the head, all the way into that background.
I know this is all a lot to take in, so don't be afraid to pause and play or use the notes linked below this video. But as we're applying these values, you also want to make sure you slightly cut into the background. We never want to create this perfect, smooth outline around the dog where it connects to the background. What we want to do instead to make it three-dimensional is by creating that texture, that fur texture, using clusters of lines. We begin that when we're adding our dark, medium, and lights, step 5, 6, and 7.
So wash it out and use color mixture 3 for the white we have left on that side of the ear. All right, I'm going to go to color mixture 2 because it's not as dark as our darkest brown violet, and paint like this. If you watch my brush strokes, I'm going lines above this right eye, clustering them.
And every next line curves a little bit more to the right until I've covered up all the white above the eye.
I didn't bring it all the way over because that's going to be highlighted with color mixture 3.
So now I'm blending into color mixture 2 that we just applied, blending color mixture 3, our lighter medium value.
And with color mixture 3, we can start working above the head, joining it to that darker one because it starts to get a little bit lighter up there, and then fold around. It kind of folds in ever so slightly. Now let's keep working on the darkest side on the right. I'm going to go back to a combo between color mixture 2 and 1.
Applying our dark value below the mouth now on the right.
I'm going to wash out my brush because it is getting a little bit sticky. That's a good sign that I need to wash it off. Because this is lighter, so I'm not going to paint there. But it does start to get darker right to the underneath the ear. And then down into this dent. So that's where it's pretty dark. I'll jump straight to color mixture 1, paint that in. See how that dark, that little fold of hair overlap is?
All right, so when it comes to painting dogs with long fur, in this step 5, where we're applying our dark and some of the medium values, we want to separate those clumps of fur. Again, especially on the darkest side. But on the left side where we have a lot of light, I'll use a medium and sometimes a medium to light value to separate those clumps, all while simultaneously applying clusters of lines.
And that comes down to like another little pocket overlap of fur right here.
Another reminder to not focus on detail here. We're applying a base. We want to be generous. We just want to get that one main base layer down first.
All right, so I'll go back to color mixture 1. There's the really dark shadow right here. See how there's that fold that's getting a little bit of light there, but then darkness there. And so I'll fill that in. I'll fill this clump in with color mixture 2. I'm going back to color mixture 2 to fill in this area, like this area. Okay, then I'll just go straight into that color mixture 3 and start blending to lighten that area up as I come down. And this area too.
Now, the best part of our paint being wet is that we can make any adjustments, adding a little darkness or lightening it up while it's wet. And we're going to do that to the right of the right side of the smile. It needs to be a bit darker, so I'll blend directly into that color mixture 1.
I'll go to color mixture 3 and start adding more lightness to this clump of fur.
So we're coming down where we start to get a little bit more light. So I am mainly in this step number 5, working with color mixture 1, 2, and 3, but soon we'll work primarily with our medium values.
I'll go to color mixture 1 for this clump. I'm going to separate this here. And then fill it in with color mixture 3. Then I'll go to color mixture 2. I'll actually paint this entire area in with color mixture 2 and then adjust the lights and darks. Going back to color mixture 1, getting this darkness along that clump. And it kind of curves in. See that? Very thin amount of paint left on my brush, but while I have it, I'm going to just bring that clump down.
these golden locks. They're so beautiful, but they can be definitely a challenge to separate. So this is separate too. I'm going to bring that over top. And then with color mixture 4, because that's getting a lot of light here, I'll paint that in with color mixture 4. Now, as we move to the left along the chest, we're going to be working with much less color mixture 1, but what I have mixed up is color mixture 1 mixed with 2. And let's just get the area underneath this clump that kind of wraps around under the chest. I'm pressing down pretty hard on my brush to cover up a good amount of space.
All right, creatives, so we are now moving into step 6, and that's to apply our medium values, where we primarily work with our medium and even light values, but of course going back to those dark values when we need to, but really trying to focus on covering up that white.
All right, so then I'll move to color mixture 3 and start painting in the main clumps over top those areas.
Now give your lines a bit of a curve at the end. These are silky, long, slightly wavy fur. Some parts even look curly, like around the ears. So don't just make them straight. We want to give it a little curl.
And you know what? I'm going to go back to color mixture 1 mixed with 2. Get in a few lines to break up those clumps a little bit more than I have. I'll take them all the way underneath the tongue.
Something I see artists forget quite a bit are the subtle shadows that we see underneath the chin. So it may not be extreme at all, but you really want to show the viewer the separation between the chin and the chest. So just a slight color difference is all you need to separate those two body parts. And I tell Masterclass students often it's better to go too dark than too light in this step. We can easily lighten things up by layering over top, as opposed to having to redo the whole base layer and starting over.
And then go back to color mixture 3.
Now this lower right corner here, the rest of the fur that is left white, I'll paint in with this color, mixture 3. But along the outer edge where it cuts into that purple background, I'll use brush strokes that are a bit more wispy, have a little curl at the end going out to the right. I'm going to continue on with color mixture 3. This is our prime medium value, so be careful how much you're using. If you need to mix it more before you lose it, do that now.
All right, so now I'll start getting with color mixture 2 mixed with 3. That's the color I'll use to create, just like we did the darkest areas on the right, we'll get the darkest areas on the left. And basically where I have all that traceable line, those traceable lines, that's where I'll be outlining very loosely, very liberally.
Just like I said before, as we move to the left where the fur is facing that light source, we'll use a medium value to define the clumps now. Well done, we've covered with at least one layer the entire right side. That's the opposite side of the light source with our dark and medium values and a few light values. But now we're going to start working on the left side. And then we get to that ear and we start to see a dark shadow. So I'm going to mix up color mixture 1 and 2, and I'm going to start defining that pretty dark shadow underneath that left ear. Now, how we doing? You doing okay? We have pretty much the hardest parts behind us. We're almost done with our medium values. We'll then move into our light values. That ugly phase can be really discouraging, but don't focus on that right now. We can't judge our paintings yet. Just you wait, you'll see how quickly we can take the painting out of the ugly phase at the end and wrap it up to this beautiful masterpiece. So I'm going to use a mixture of number 1 with color number 2. We're going to work on those shadows to the left of the smile, a bit darker than we need to, but like I said, better to go too dark than too light. Now take note to the length of my lines along the ear, much shorter lines than along the chest and body. I used color mixture 2, but it was too dark. So I'm washing out my brush and moving to color mixture 3 to fill in a lot of the area in between those clumps. All right, so color mixture 3 will be our friend for filling in a lot of this white. It's like the perfect medium value. And so until I say so, until I tell you when I'll switch it, we're just going to continue on with color mixture 3. Don't forget to add a slight curl to this left ear. Be careful using the tip of your brush to cut into the lavender background slightly and drawing it up with a little wave. And then right here, the fur's going in the opposite direction, curling the other way. Continuing with color mixture 3, I'm going to have those curls curving to the down and to the right. So we have all these different directions, these wavy, slightly curly strands are going. And by the way, I want to correct myself there because we're really painting clumps in this phase. We paint strands when we layer over top. So clumps now, lots of really specific detailed strands later. So first I'll use, to define this line to the right of the left eye, I'll use color mixture 3, but then I'll darken the area up with a mixture of color 1 and 2. I'll work beneath that sunflower and then blend it into color mixture 3 right on my canvas. Then I'll continue working with that color on the petals to the left of the eye and then below the eye as well. I'll continue working with color mixture 1 mixed with 2, surrounding the sunflower leaves. Not all of that area, but a little bit. All right, give a thorough cleaning. Let that brush get nice and clean and damp, and we'll move on to color mixture 3 again. Moving to the lower left side of Maisy's body. I see a little bit of white that I left, and I'll move to color mixture 2 to fill in that area here. Then I'll wash up my brush thoroughly, pat it damp, and then move back to color mixture 3 to work on the bridge of the nose. Now I'm going to move my brush at an angle here, not directly up and down and not horizontally, but literally creating brush strokes that curl around the bridge of the nose and join with the gray. I'll fill in a lot of the rest of the white below that left eye, but not around that smile, and then work in the area above the right eye. I'm going to cover more white on the front of the nose with color mixture 3. Now with color mixture 3, we're going to do something a little different here. I'm going to fill in just the rest of the white that I have below the chin. We'll fill the chin in with a different color. But then I'll add some layers over top the right side with this medium value to define those clumps a little bit more and break up those big blocky clumps, even using some random strands like this one right here that can overlap some of those shadows. And the other goal that I'm trying to achieve right now is also covering up any little white specks that I left when I applied my first layer on this side. I do see some little white specks that I really don't want to have too many of, and I'll even go back to some of my dark values to cover those up. So I'm going to move to color mixture 2 mixed with a little bit of color mixture 3 and cover up some of these white gaps. So right now, of course, watch what I'm doing here, but take a moment to step back and look at your painting and make sure you cover up with at least one layer any white gaps, white specks that you left over. Maybe you have to revisit those dark values or mix up more medium values to apply. So take that time now. All right, so I'm going to go in with a mixture of 3 mixed with 4, and I'm going to fill in a lot of the leftover white. I'll mostly use color mixture 3, a little bit more of a medium value, working carefully underneath that chin. All right, so I have color mixture 4 on my brush, and with lines that are thinner than the ones I've been applying to fill in those big clumps, I'll use color mixture 4 to start adding those over top the clumps. Remember, the lines are long with a slight curl. I'm not covering up the entire base layer, I'm just painting over top parts of it. Get ready, this is a great example of that wave I've been talking about, those long wavy lines that we want to really get in this fur. Now, another little tip for helping to make long fur look realistic is where the clumps end and overlap another clump of fur, we want to have tiny, thin clusters of lines cutting into the shadow and over top that previous layer. All right, so with color mixture 4, I'm going to fill in the rest of the white on the bridge of the nose and on the forehead. Just take note to the direction I'm painting these strands. They move to the left, curving around the left eye. Then we get to like only one small section that's straight up and down, vertical, and then it moves to the right, curving around the right eye. For those of you that missed it in my past couple tutorials, I have completed the Master Animal Fur Guide. It's in the online Animal Art Masterclass with a focus on pet fur. So I cover all different types of fur: wiry fur, curly, straight, short, long, brindle, spotted, striped fur. All this covered in my video and ebook painting guide, linked down below. It's only found in my online Animal Art Masterclass. I'm going to add a bit of color mixture 4 to the white left on that left ear, but then I darken it up with a mix of 2 and 3 because it's too big of a jump from light to dark. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. I'll also wisp out those strands into the background. And finally, for Maisy's beautiful smile, we can finish that off with color mixture 4. Now, on the day I was painting Maisy, it was a bit of a rainy, cold fall day, so it gets dark here, but then it gets much lighter again soon. So if you're squinting slightly, I am so sorry. In just a little bit, it'll get much brighter and crisper. All right, so you may want to watch me first before you give this a try. I'm going to use color 2 to create that little indent. It's like a little dark line, very subtle though, at a slight angle on the bridge of Maisy's nose, which I'll then pull over to the right and connect with the other medium browns. That's when I spot that I can darken up right above the right eye with color mixture 2, which I'll then blend into those darker browns below the right side of the sunflower. I didn't blend it that well, so I leave it and then I end up going back to it just to blend it out a little bit more. But then I pull that color right above the far left side of Maisy's nose. It's color mixture 2. There's just a little bit more darkness right there. What I'm trying to do here, and I especially do this with dogs with long fur, is get those medium and dark values down. Not all of them, but at least 1 or 2 layers over top, prepping this fur for those highlights that we'll be applying on the top of these layers. Now what I just did is create this little dark brown line that I missed when I was applying my dark values with a combo of color mixture 1 and 2. And then using that to thicken up the shadow below the right eye. There's things that we will likely miss when we apply our dark and medium values, and we want to revisit that now and then go to our highlights. I find I don't really have to do this much of fine-tuning before the highlights with short-haired dogs as I do with long, especially curly-haired dogs, where we have so much dimension. We have a lot of depth we have to capture with all those clumps and the texture in that fur. So if you missed that, I use color mixture 2 to pull down that soft shadow below Maisy's left eye. It just follows down from beneath the flower. And I'm going to revisit those dark values real quick. With color mixture 1, I'm going to touch up any of those real dark areas that I missed or maybe have white specks that I need to cover up. Don't overdo it with this color. We don't want to have too many darks in the areas that need to be a medium value facing that light source. But if there's areas that you need to touch up with the darks, do that now. And then we'll move on to step 7. Now, because of the light source, the area to the right of the tongue is going to cast a pretty strong shadow. So a mixture of 1 with 2, I will add over top these areas that I think I made a little too light. I'll darken them up now. I'm also seeing that the paint looks quite thin in this lower right corner. So with color mixture 2, I'm going to add more pigment to that, richen it up. Also get it slightly darker. All right, creatives, we have made it to step 7. We're going to add those highlights. In this step, we often move to our smaller brushes. We start really focusing on detail now. It's not that we have all the medium and dark values applied by now, but we at least have 2 layers that are relatively in the right spots beneath where we can apply the highlights. If you watch me before you try this, I'm using color mixture 5, using it with my brush and my fingers to connect the gray area with that medium to light brown area on the left part of the snout. I'm creating this thin, smooth layer, so that's why I'm using my fingers to just smooth it out. And then right above it, again with a very thin amount of paint, I'm creating an angled block that doesn't connect all the way to the top left of the snout, but almost, because you'll find that with highlights, less is more. It's really about where we place it and not about how much we're trying to cover, because adding just a little amount in the right spots helps to create this 3D look. I'll also highlight that tiniest little bump of fur in the top left above the nose. And do you remember adding that line in the center of the bridge of the nose? I'll add the leftover color mixture 5 on my brush in that area. Now, because the light source is hardly hitting the right side of that snout, but we want to carefully join that light gray to the darker brown, I'm going to use color mixture 3, our medium value, to join those 2 areas together. Because it's not uncommon when we apply our highlights that sometimes we need to revisit our medium values to get the highlights right, even gauge them better and where to place them. Now I've got one of my favorite brushes, the size 5 Arteza angle brush. You don't want to miss this part here. I'm adding a little bit of paint to my brush, flattening out both sides to create that flat edge, and then carefully using that flat edge to create these long strands over top the medium value areas with gaps in between, much larger gaps than we've added thus far, while also turning my brush, in some areas twisting my brush to create that wave. Now here's the other very important part. The point of my angle brush, because it's cut at an angle, the bristles, the point is at the top, and how I can get these lines so thin and precise is because I'm really using that point. And this is why I love this brush so much for long fur, especially long, wavy, even curly fur like this. We want more of our light strands in the areas facing the light source and a lot less on that right side of Maisy. But I'm still slightly cutting into some of those real dark brown areas. Not covering up the base layers, not trying to, really leaving large gaps in between strands. Now it's really important that the length changes when you get to the ear. Just like when we applied the medium and dark values on the ears, we want to make sure those individual highlighted strands are not long like the ones on the chest. They need to be shorter. Now on my paint palette, my colors are starting to mesh together a bit. They're getting a little messy, but I am using a mix between 3, 4, and 5. That's the colors I've combined and mixed to highlight the left side. Now be careful how much you're adding. We really don't want to overdo it with this phase, so please do take your time and watch me carefully. I'm going to darken this color ever so slightly by adding in a little bit of color mixture 2. That's how we can adjust the colors as we go. We can just darken our highlights by adding more of the medium value or even dark value, or lightening the value by adding in more white. Now here's an important point, and right now I'm going to pull in even more of color mixture 2 into this. The highlights will actually be a medium value on the right side of Maisy. Highlights just mean we're lightening up an area, so we need to make sure that it doesn't get too light on the dark side. We want to make sure that all the parts of the dog are consistent with where that light source is, which is why as I'm moving down along the right side of Maisy, it's getting more light. So I'm going to start pulling in more of color mixture 4 and 5, because in this lower area, the light is hitting it, so it's going to be lighter. Now in this lower area of the chest, the hair, the fur gets a little bit more wispy, a little bit disheveled looking. Fur never lays perfectly. It can look silky like we're trying to do here, but it can go in all different directions. So then I'll move to the center of Maisy's chest with this color with some added color mixture 3 to it. And I really recommend you watch me again here and how I layer over top those dark values. As I move down, I'm twisting my brush, adding very little pressure to my brush to keep each strand thin, allowing the length to also be relatively the same so it looks like it's flowing over top the clumps below it. And I'll continue on with that color, breaking up the clumps, creating these individual strands over top. And here I push my luck just slightly, almost a little too high up with those highlights. Any higher up on those clumps and they would just be out of place. They would be too light for that area. So I'll continue on, keeping the flat edge of my angle brush flat, using a mix of 5 and 4, and just breaking up those clumps, keeping each strand thin, a little bit of a wave at the end, making sure the length is right. Now here I'm going to add a bit of a highlight to the left of that line going up the bridge of the nose. And that, my friends, brings us to step 8 of my dog painting process, where we apply our rounds of values. We applied the core main values in steps 5, 6, and 7, our dark, medium, and lights, focusing less on detail and more on covering up that white, a little bit more on detail with the highlights. And now I'm going in, revisiting my dark, medium, and light values. Like right now, I've mixed up number 1 and 2 colors to revisit that area to the right of the chin, going back and plugging in any of the dark values that I accidentally went over with my medium and light values, or just dark values I missed. So now we step back from our painting and really look at what our painting needs, where some areas need to be a bit lighter or darker, or where we need to join those big jumps from dark to light with our joiner colors, also what I call medium values. Now, this was a mistake here. I added a little too much white in this area. It needs to be a mix between color mixture 1 and 2. I wouldn't add as much white as I did. I should have washed my brush up before going in. But color mixture 1 and 2 will help to join these two dark and light areas, just like I was talking about. Those medium values help us to join the extreme jumps from dark brown to our light tan. All right, I'll wash up my brush, especially because I don't want any paint sticking and gluing to it. I'm seeing Maisy needs a few more highlights in the lower left corner of her body. And here in this phase, you might likely find that just 1 or 2 brush strokes to create those strands of highlights is all you need. Less is more. Figure out how you can break up those clumps and make the fur look more flowing and realistic. All right, so next I'm going to wash up my brush, set my brush aside, and move back to my size 4 Arteza round brush. I'll pick up color mixture 5, very small amount of it, to add the highlights going in the proper direction that I've gone over several times in this tutorial. Above the right eye, the fur is more angled to the right. Next to the left eye, the fur is more angled to the left. I'll do this adding more of a highlight on that right side because of the light source, and also pulling out those highlights on Maisy's smile and snout. There's a small highlight I missed here. I'll use color mixture 5 just on the top right of the snout above the nose. And I'm going to add the smallest little dab. It's not connected to the smile, but almost. And it really helps to bring more attention to that smile. Now, I just couldn't put my finger on what was off about that snout, and it's the light source. We actually want to darken up that right of the snout. It needs to be dark. This shadow is out of place. So I'm mixing up a medium gray, not too dark, not too light. I'm covering up the light tans we applied here, and then blending in some browns while that's wet. So I'll add in a mixture of color mixture 2 and 3 into that gray, working up, smoothly connecting it to all the browns that we added, dark and medium browns. And then with a small dab, I'll mix color mixture 2 with 3 because the shadow under that left eye just needs to be lightened up a bit. It's a little too dark right now. All right, so guess what we're gonna work on next? That sunflower. We can finally finish the connected part. Now, we definitely could have finished that a long time ago, but oh well, we just got so entrenched in this fur. So I mixed up white with cadmium yellow, a very light, vibrant yellow, and without covering up all the base layer of yellow ochre that we applied, I'll add slight, delicate little dabs over top each petal. You see how you can still see that yellow ochre beneath? And especially surrounding the center of the flower? Well, we want that. And now for the inside of the flower, I'm going to mix raw umber with color mixture 2. And if you watch me, I'm going to create like a little moon shape, like a C, inside the center of the flower. See how I'm not closing that moon shaped, I'm just having it on the upper left side of the inside of the center of the flower. And then on the dead center of that, I'll use raw umber and black to further define that. Now we want to add our highlights to the leaves of the sunflower. I'm going to mix up a very small amount of grass green and lots of cadmium yellow with a clean, damp brush. I'm not putting too much detail into these leaves, just adding a few dabs here or there to add highlights to the surface without covering up that base. All right, so do you remember at the very beginning when we were working on our background and I mentioned you don't need to put too much of your focus blending that background perfectly because we're actually going to apply a second layer later? Well, guess what? That's what we're going to do right now, very loosely. I'm going to grab my size 10 flat brush, the largest one, and just mix up one color. It's our grayish violet with lots of white, a little bit of violet, and even smaller amount of black. And I want to intentionally leave brushstrokes here. And I'm not trying to cover up whatsoever the base layer. I'm just wisping my brush to create lots of texture going around the left and right sides of Maisy. The other thing I'm trying to do here is prep the area behind where we're going to add whiskers. This is step 9. We want to make sure the area around the snout, by the ears, in the background where we will lay those strands, those whiskers over top, and any areas around the ears where we'll be applying those inner ear hairs. That's what we want to prep. We want to get those areas completed before we layer those hairs over top. Now, we don't really have to worry about inner ear hairs. It's not like Maisy's ears are sticking up like German Shepherd ears. We have lots of inner ear hairs, but we do have to prep around the snout for those whiskers. So along with this background, if there's any areas around the snout and ears, even a little bit of the upper chest that you want to finish, get that completed now, because next I'll apply the whiskers. The reason we want to have that done is so that we don't have to tediously go around each whisker and try and get that completed after we've already applied the whiskers. It happens if we have to, that's okay, but we want to avoid that at as much as we can. All right, so let's get mixing for those tiny little whiskers around the snout. The short and long ones we'll paint now. Use any brush or a palette knife to mix this up. Then we'll move to our 3-0 liner brush and apply the whiskers, paint them in. So I'm mixing a very light gray with a little bit of black and lots of white. And then I'll grab my liner brush, add only the smallest amount of paint to the tip of my brush. I'll zoom in here so you can see how short these are, but I'm going to create very thin, short strands right below the nose. Very carefully, only adding a very small amount of pressure to our brushes. We're going to cluster these lines all throughout the snout, even over the dark gray, but not covering up that base, and even cutting out into the tongue area where we can see that shadow in the back of the mouth. Alright, so next I'm going to paint in those long whiskers. Now whiskers aren't so bad. I know they can be very intimidating, but if you need to, grab a piece of paper or canvas that you can practice on a few times to build that confidence. I like to start on the right side because I'm a righty, and the base where the whisker comes out of the snout is the thickest point, and it should be the thinnest point at the tip of that whisker. So we want to relieve the pressure off our brush as we finish off that whisker at the end, creating that really nice thin tip. And we don't have too many whiskers to paint in. I created 4 whiskers here. You can apply a few more. Cats are known to have lots of thick, long, full whiskers, but not so much for dogs. And I'll finish off that snout adding more of my thin, short strands, which, by the way, barely cuts into that medium to dark gray on the far right side of the snout. Now the gray I'm working with right now is very light, and I actually pull out the very light grays in Maisy's eyes, those eye highlights, with this gray in this brush. I just expand the circles a little bit more on the areas closest to the light source. All right, creatives, so we have made it to step 11 of the 12-step dog painting process. This is the final step before we apply a varnish. So this is where we complete our portrait. Now look at me right around where those whiskers are. I'm touching up the ear on the right. I added a little bit of color mixture 1 with 2. I'm going to thicken up that line that's right above the right ear and the area in between the face and the right ear, and also bring up that smile just a little bit more. Now, tips for finishing a dog portrait. I recommend scanning the proportions, making any adjustments to make sure those are accurate, adjusting the values, so maybe doing more rounds of values to get those right, hopefully not around the whiskers, and applying more medium values that help to join those real light areas to the very dark value areas. That's actually what I'm doing now. I picked up color mixture 4 to add more of my highlights. They're too light, so I went in with color mixture 2 and directly on my canvas darken that up. So I have that highlight, but it's a medium value on that right side. Then I'm picking up color mixture 3 to darken up ever so slightly the top right on Maisy's forehead, softening that dark brown line between her right eye and the ear. I just want to get rid of any bold lines that don't need to be there. Then on the far right, upper right of that right ear, I'll mix color mixture 5 mixed with a little bit of 2 and 3, not making it too light, but just a little bit where it is getting touched slightly by the light source. Notice I need to redefine the ends where the clumps overlap on the far left side of Maisy's chest. I'll grab color mixture 2, putting back in that shadow, but then we want to have highlights layered over top that. So I'm going to grab color mixture 5 and very carefully pull those strands down. What I'll also do in this step is redefine strands in case I accidentally made strands too thick. I can go back in with my dark value, cut over top that, and then make more adjustments with those highlights. And stepping back and looking at my painting, I see what it needs. It's that left ear. I'm gonna pull in color mixture 2, soften those real dark browns on the left side of the ear. We don't want it too dark in the upper part of the ear. And then for the last final brush strokes, I'll add color mixture 4 and put back a curved line to finish off the painting. And that brings me to the final step, our varnish step. If you choose to varnish it, I recommend at least waiting 7 days. Once it's completed, to let it dry, begin to cure, and then varnish with a spray or a paint-on varnish. Then waiting 24 hours between varnish coats before you package it and ship it off. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this one blessed you. If you have any questions or even tutorial requests, leave them in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe if this helped you. I'll see you in the next animal painting tutorial. Have a blessed day. Bye.